So, this is the Smuggler. Thank you, everybody, for coming back and watching. This week, we're going to be having a little conversation with my man, Lonecrit, and we're going to be having a bit of a debate about shonen anime. Lonecrit?
Hello, I am Lonecrit, otherwise known as The Lonely Critic. I have a small channel on YouTube called Lonely Production, and I was invited into this discussion by Smuggler because I really love shonen anime, and because I'm a genius.
Yeah, I thought your opinion really summarized, we both have very polarized opinions on shonen, so I feel like we really summarize either side of the same coin.
Hey, but I'm sure we both want the same thing: better anime.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, basically, I'm fairly anti-shonen, whereas you are very pro-shonen, as you've demonstrated.
And I wouldn't say it's the best genre, but I do very much like and appreciate it.
Fair enough. And yeah, you even go out of your way to buy the manga and read the light novels and all that good stuff. So Lonecrit, how did you first get into watching anime?
Oh, well, when I was much younger, like 5 or 6 years old, my father used to buy Studio Ghibli movies, and I, as many young kids do, the second I took a liking to it, I claimed it as my own. And so, over time, I stopped watching Studio Ghibli movies. But then, when I was a little older, they used to play on Greek TV all sorts of cartoons like anime like Shaman King, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, so I used to watch those. And eventually, when I was, I think in my second year of junior high school, I watched this one WatchMojo.com list and then started watching Soul Eater and then Code Geass, and then it really kicked off when this one teacher at my cram school recommended me Death Note, and from there it was only uphill. Well, downhill a bit recently, but you get the idea.
Fair enough. Yeah, because I've come up with a bit of a theory, and I believe that people's taste, especially when it comes to shonen and stuff like that, really has to do with when they started watching anime. Like more often than not, people who started watching anime from an early age are more likened to getting more into shonen anime. At least that's what I've seen, because I've come into it much later, like much after the fact. I didn't start watching anime until I was well out of high school. So
I've got a theory regarding that too.
Oh, what's yours?
I think that one of the greatest strengths of the shonen genre of anime, and what people love about it, is that oftentimes it has these characters that never cease striving for their ideals with this constant and relentless motivation that kind of embodies that childlike innocence that many of us had when we were younger and we used to see the world in a more black and white way.
Yeah, so I suppose shonen anime really encapsulate that youthful kind of spirit. So when you're in that, you relate really well to it, and as you get older, having seen that when you were younger, you end up getting nostalgic for it or longing for it. So you go back and you have a greater appreciation for that.
Very much so.
My I don't think shonens are necessarily bad shows, but I definitely think that the way that they are written really lends themselves to basically go on forever and not really end in a way that's satisfactory when you compare it to the amount of time that you've put into a show, if that makes sense.
Are you referring to a particular type of shonen?
I mean, I'm mostly referring to those long-running action battle shonens like Naruto, One Piece, Fairy Tail, the ones that run for literally hundreds of episodes. I just think that I see. I think that it's important for a show to build up on itself, and then as a way of kind of wrapping itself up, it kind of after 12 episodes, it wraps itself up, and you have this nice little catharsis where that show left you with those emotions in a nice, neat little
I have a
way.
question. In this category, do you include shows like Yu-Gi-Oh! That go through many different generations and update themselves, and shows like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that each have their own almost self-contained parts, almost like they're entirely different anime?
I mean, yeah, you could also throw those in there as well, because they do follow that long form action battle format. with the longer the show runs, I feel, the less likely it is for you to reach a satisfactory payoff at the end. Because, the conclusion needs to be the sum of the previous episodes. It reaches the point where it's impossible for you to, I guess, for a show's ending to meet your expectations, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that's completely up to the writer, and not necessarily the format of the series, or how long it is. For example, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Written and illustrated by Hirohiko Araki and recently adapted in 2012 and onwards into a rather long anime by David Production, it has this specific characteristic where in small self-contained arcs after from part 3 and onwards, where the individual parts get significantly longer than they were for parts 1 and 2, it takes individual very small arcs, usually lasting only 2 episodes, so it gets to pick a theme, a setup, a build-up, and a payoff for those individual small arcs, so it does actually give the viewer a decent incentive to watch, and also a good level of payoff for the amount of time they invest in those shows.
Okay.
I mean, in that show, but it's also done differently in other ways.
Yeah. So and I think that's probably the most effective way to do a long form show is by basically divvying it up into smaller sections so that you essentially do have like mini climaxes throughout the story. And I suppose that's what most of them do. But I think the end goal, JoJo's is a bit of an exception to the rule because that manga's been going on since the 70s and stuff like that. And
I think it's the 80s.
The 80s. Okay, so yeah, I'm
not sure.
I mean, but when I look at JoJo, I believe that JoJo, the creators of JoJo, between David Production and the manga writer, I think that it definitely has the potential to end in a satisfactory way, whereas other shows might not. Like, what you end up having after so many hundreds of episodes is a fall off in potential viewership, lower ratings for the TV releases, and just less and less people watching a show that goes on. So when you look at shows like Fairy Tail and One Piece, it becomes hard for them to maintain a consistent level of quality throughout the course of hundreds of episodes, which eventually leads to them having to end in a haphazard way, much like what happened to Bleach.
Again, that's completely up to the writer.
Well, I mean, it's not just the writer though, because it's the people. Because the writer's nothing without the people who watch it. And after it's been so many years, well, if your manga no longer resonates with the core demographic of the readership, which is more often than not young males, your manga is going to end up getting canceled.
I'd just like to say that there are other ways of doing long-running shonen. It's not often seen in anime adaptations, I don't know why, but oftentimes you have long-running manga that are sometimes below 200 chapters, and what they do is have a couple of small build-up arcs, and then just do one really huge arc. So they effectively set themselves up, go through one narrative, and then deliver a payoff to almost a single story without stretching themselves out too far. One example that I'd like to note of is Siren, that effectively in the first chapter builds up its character, in the next 10 chapters starts off the base for its story. Around that point, after those 10 chapters, gives a hook for what happens later, and then for the entire rest of the story, just builds up the main story with very few arcs, and therefore at the end delivers a satisfying payoff.
But is the payoff like let's say we have a one core show that's 12 episodes. I don't know, for example, you look at Anohana, shows like Anohana, or just shorter shows that have a very short build up and a tremendous payoff. I don't think that 200 episodes is really justified for the narrative that's being delivered.
Well, the longer a show is, the more it can build on itself. Again, this is completely up to the writer on how many mini setups, build-ups, and payoffs they decide to put into their story, or how much time they choose to put into overall larger events. Another, for example, type of story arc within a whole that can easily work for many shonen, and even just be a shonen in itself, is the Alabasta arc from One Piece, in which it does something very clever. After the main characters enter the Grand Line, they start the first large arc in One Piece, and in that arc, they have lots of mini arcs included with many different locations, characters, and let's say just completely different areas. So each individual mini arc has its own story building up to the larger arc. And a single shonen arc or a shonen story is not singularly defined by its ending. It's also all the little bits that go in between.
Well, yeah, but I feel like the final impression that a show leaves is the most powerful, and a negative impression leaves a much more lasting impression on the viewer than a positive one does. And it's a psychological factor that we respond twice as powerfully to negative stimuli as we do to positive. So scalding somebody is going to be twice as effective as praising them. So you have to praise them twice as much to achieve the same results, essentially. But with One Piece and these other shows, and you're talking about the mini arcs that go into them, what you end up having is a divergence where the writer and the viewer, to keep track of all of these different stories that are all happening simultaneously, what you end up with...
They have to pay attention.
Well, I mean, what you end up with, though, is the show or the manga is jumping all over the place. You have all of these things happening simultaneously, and you have hundreds of characters, and a show or a battle that should take 10 or 15 minutes in real time ends up taking 3 hours in the show because you're showing it from the perspective of 18 different people, and then after a certain point people might forget what happened in previous episodes because it happened 300 episodes ago. So now we have flashbacks, and then we have run-ins with production issues, and manga's running slower than the anime is keeping up to them, so we have filler episodes and filler arcs and stuff like that. My buddies were like, yeah, you should really go check out Naruto. I can show you a really good chart that you can look at to remove all of the filler episodes so that you can just watch listening to my friends talk about these shows. It's if I was watching these shows on a weekly basis, it'd be like pulling teeth. I wouldn't be able to do it.
Well, okay, there are other shonen, for example, though, that have handled this kind of thing where you don't have multiple battles going simultaneously and somehow being stretched out, and instead you just do them one at a time. A absolutely brilliant example of this happening is the Dark Tournament arc from Yu Yu Hakusho, in which it has its own underlying story that's being progressed with each fight that's given, and because it's a tournament, everything's one at a time, each fight only lasting one episode, and in a sense, each fight also being its own individual mini-story, as you have the original meeting between two characters, the way they fight and learn about each other, and the climax of the fight, signaling an end to this mini-story.
So, and essentially what Boku no Hero Academia is doing in the current season with its tournament arc. So I feel like under certain circumstances, those can definitely be well, but those can definitely be done well, but with tournament arcs too, a tournament arc is, I guess, a really good tool to show a lot of cool fights and kind of stage characters together that wouldn't normally fight, but I feel
Not only that,
I feel like
it's a good chance. Wait a second. It's also a good chance to bring together more characters and express their or rather to flesh out their personalities and maybe even develop them more efficiently.
But wouldn't it make more sense to develop these characters' relationships in the context of the greater narrative rather than just staging a separate, unrelated tournament? Because when we look at these tournament arcs, they're fun. We got all these characters interacting with each other, but when you actually look at the grand, whatever narrative the show's going for, whether it be to beat the big bad guy or whatever, these tournament arcs essentially do nothing in the way of progressing that, unless the show is made that way. Kind of like Hunter x Hunter, I suppose.
Yeah, again, as I mentioned, in Yu Yu Hakusho, this is exactly what's done. The Dark Tournament is only this one series of events that takes place in the only slightly larger story of the arc, involving Yusuke Urameshi, his team, and Genkai, going against the Dark Tournament organizers, Sakyo, and also finally fighting Toguro in the end.
When it's done properly within the narrative, the tournament arc literally is the story that's being pushed forward. But when you look at it in a more conventional sense and how it's used more often than not, it's really just a way to pad the story. Like, I feel like the writers just don't really know what they're going to do yet. So they're using this tournament arc to kind of put it off so that they can build the future narrative. Like, these shows run faster than the story
Not
does.
at all. No, not at all. Again, Yu Yu Hakusho, with each battle that the main character Yusuke Urameshi fights in, he meets new people and new relationships are formed, and we see him developing as a character with each individual fight. I wouldn't exactly call this padding out.
Well, no, but Yu Yu Hakusho and shows like Boku no Hero Academia are more of the exception and not the rule. Right, I'm saying how these tournament arcs are usually used in the context of these shows, like between Dragon Ball Z and Naruto, and shows of the like.
Hey, I'm just saying it can be done. It's up to the writer.
Mm-hmm, absolutely, and that's what I'm saying though.
It can be done for no reason.
Like, if I'm sitting down and I'm gonna be watching a show, and this show is gonna probably be at least a few hundred episodes, and I'm at the beck and call of the writer, like, over the course of 300 episodes, who's to say he's not just going to fuck up? He's not going to throw that whole story away. And then my investment in the story, all of that time that I put in, is all for naught. Like, when I look at a show, too, you got to think, like, opportunity cost. Basically, anything that you do, when you make a decision, you forego the next best alternative. So the opportunity cost of these shows that are running several hundred episodes is extremely high, because over the course of a 300 episode show or whatever, I could have watched 50 other shows, so like, in order to buy into that, it needs to be extremely compelling.
Shows like this are high risk, high return. If you invest your time into them, then you're sure to get a lot back. And even if the writer does actually screw up at some point, you know what? Screwing up one individual component, or maybe a few, doesn't screw up every other thing. Yes, it may lower the quality of your experience as a whole, but that doesn't ruin your entire experience. Just like when watching a shorter show, one problem in the story can effectively ruin a big part of it for you, even if you haven't put much time in. Again, it's how you choose to invest your time, and oftentimes it has also to do with your outlook on the work.
But like, specifically, and the reason why I have such a hard time buying into these shows as well. Like, I mean, there are certain shonen shows that I do enjoy, Soul Eater and Boku no Hero Academia being two of them, just because they're shows that are written in a way that wrap themselves up in a relatively short amount of time when I compare them to other shonen shows. Soul Eater was 50 episodes. Then Boku no Hero Academia.
I would like to add, though, that Boku no Hero Academia has only adapted a fraction of the manga.
Yeah, I mean, Boku no Hero has the potential to go for much longer, but it's also being staged in such a way that it could very easily wrap itself up if ratings or, Blu-ray sales don't keep up. Boku no Hero Academia is written in a really tight way that could be ended at any point in time, in a very short period of time, and still have a satisfactory ending. Whereas shows like One Piece, for example, with all of these diverging storylines and stuff like that, if the production levels started to drop, or if the studios started to run out of money, or the readership ended up dying off, it would take a very long time, like tens of episodes, just to wrap up all of the things that they have currently going on.
There's only one little flaw with that. One Piece won't dry up because it's the most popular manga and weekly Shonen Jump. Even if it does drop, there's absolutely no way it's going to drop that far before the story reaches its conclusion.
Well, I used One Piece as an example, like, with the diverging storylines. I don't mean specifically that One Piece is at risk of doing that. I just mean that that's a very common issue that a lot of these shows have, and that's why Bleach didn't have a satisfactory ending.
Well, again, it's up to the writers. They decide whether to make it or break it.
Well, it's also up to the adaptation as well. Like, I mean, and like, once again, they're putting an awful lot of faith in the writers for a show that's going to be going for a few hundred episodes. Like, and we're talking about a financial investment on behalf of the studios. That's absolutely massive. Each anime episode is at least $130,000 per episode to air on commercial television in Japan. And then that's not including foreign licensing agreements and the like as well. So, I mean, yeah, like we're talking about a lot of money that's being thrown around. I also look, like, I mean, when you look at the production resources and the talent that is actually in the anime industry, it's very finite. There are very few qualified people who can make these shows well in the way that they do. And the more people that work on these longer running shows, like, you know, I mean, Gintima's a great show, but Gintama, Naruto, One Piece, these shows that are hundreds of episodes. I think about all of the other shows that don't have the production staff that they need, that are, it's opportunity cost, basically. Everybody's foregoing the opportunity to work on other shows to work on Naruto, and we have these shonen serializations getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and these production committees getting richer and richer and richer, whereas the rest of it is just kind of falling off to the wayside.
In all fairness, though, all kinds of shonen adaptations, there are many long-running shonen adaptations that, depending on the focus they put into the story and depending on what parts of the story they choose to adapt, they can make it so that the story can end at a certain point. One brilliant example of this is Hajime no Ippo, in which Season 1 ends with the main character Makanouchi Ippo becoming the Japanese featherweight champion, but then after it gets a Season 2 and 3, Season 3 ends up with a different character called Mamoru Takamura, who has still had a low level of screen time put into him in Season 1, but a great level in Seasons 2 and 3. The show concludes with his fight and his character arc, rather than the main characters, and from that point it becomes about how the main character grows alongside everybody else and not just on his own, and therefore it doesn't need to finish with any one given character being the focus of that finishing arc, and therefore it can end at almost any specific point. Add to that the studio that adapted it actually was very selective with what they adapted.
Well, yeah, but I feel like at that point, though, like, changing the main focus of the show can definitely, you can get a lot more runtime out of it. Like, if you completely change focus as far as, like, characters go, all of a sudden you have this whole other story that can potentially be told.
An adaptation is an adaptation. There's always the potential of this happening.
Yeah, but I mean, if the show was created in a way, or if it was written in a way that was tighter, it could have ended focusing on the main protagonist, and it could have ended with more initial investment in the main protagonist rather than focusing on other characters and kind of dividing the focus.
To me, that's rather irrelevant. What matters is that the spirit of the original work and the ideas that it encapsulated are preserved. And as long as that's done, it doesn't really matter if you change up the story a little bit.
Well, for me, it's less about the adaptation, because I'm not really into source material specifically. I look at anime as a medium unto itself. Like, I mean, and if it's done well in the context of the source material, then that's great. But if it doesn't stand up on its own, then, you know, I can't really, it is what it is. But, like, with these shows running as long as they do, I don't think it's possible for them to deliver a payoff that's adequate when I compare it to the amount of time that I've invested into this. Like, I mean, if I look at a show that I would, like, let's say I could put an exact number on the enjoyment that I've had from a show. Like, and let's say I have a show that's like a 7 out of 10, and it was like 12 episodes. And it's like, okay. So I got a big shonen show now that's like, what, like 300 or 400 episodes? Like, if I take my average enjoyment per episode, like, 7 divided by 12 for a one-core show, and then I look at, a big shonen, so even if I rated that show like a 9 or a 10, like I got 10 divided by 300. Like, if I'm looking at the amount that I'm getting back out of it, it doesn't make sense. Like, I mean, when we're talking about it economically as well, like, these shows really perforate Western culture as well, and I feel like they really help spread a misinterpretation of otaku and anime fans in general. Like, when I talk about anime, the person that I'm talking to almost always brings up one of these shows, and that's a very small portion of what's actually getting made. But that's what everybody's watching. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I guess it's personal taste. These shows are meant to cater to the largest core demographic possible. But by the same token, I don't like my shows being chalked up to Dragon Ball Z, because there's so much more nuance and so many more other alleyways of storytelling you can potentially go down. I just really don't think that these shows are justified in being as big as they are.
Okay. Again, though, some long-running shonen, I assume that's what you mean when you say these shows. Yeah. Some long-running shonen are deserving of their popularity, though, like Yu Yu Hakusho, Hajime no Ippo, Hunter x Hunter. Admittedly, the list does not go far beyond that, but you get the idea.
But all the shows that you just listed have long since stopped airing and have fallen to the wayside. And keep in mind that the average retention of otaku is only 2 to 3 years. The average person only watches anime for about 2 to 3 years and then they're out of it. So they're very unlikely to go into the back catalog unless they're sticking around longer.
I disagree. Many of these works are remembered far beyond they've ended.
They're remembered by people who have stuck around. They're remembered by, like, and when we hear about these shows, it's usually when we're hearing them from other people who have also been in the community for a very long time. But somebody who has just gotten into it will not know about these shows. And when we're looking at it too, we're kind of biased because we're also otaku YouTubers. Like, we're very much ingrained in the culture. Like, we're like the 10% of anime fans that actually took this seriously enough to start investigating and figuring out, and following these production studios and all of this work. So I feel like a lot of people won't have the same mileage.
Even so, though, many people actually do get into these kinds of shows exactly because they are interested in either the premise or the length without sort of doing their research. Hajime no Ippo is about boxing. That's already badass, and that's the kind of thing that many people do get into even without external influence. Hunter x Hunter even more so, because it's the kind of story that because of its creativity is endearing, or rather interesting, by premise alone. And it doesn't matter whether it stopped now or 10 years ago. Okay, maybe if it's longer than that, admittedly. But that's mostly because of animation.
Hajime no Ippo is a very old show. Like, I mean, as far as when we're looking at potential sample sizes,
not exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, when we're talking about the lifespan of otaku being up to 3 years on average, a very small niche of people will end up going back and watching Hajime no Ippo. It'll be a great work, and it's critically acclaimed, which is why it's still sticking around, and which is why people are still talking about it. But as far as relevance goes, most of those great shonens that aired have fallen off to the wayside. A lot of people will never hear about them.
No, actually, a lot of Hajime no Ippo specifically is still relevant, because while Season 1 came out in the early 2000s, Seasons 2 and 3 came out in, I think, 2012 and 2014, or 2013 and 2014, showing that even after a decade, it's still relevant enough to get a sequel. And Hunter x Hunter 2, that was still relevant enough, even after almost 15 years, well, I think 10, 11, 12 years, to also get a complete remake.
Well, I mean, I don't know if that means it's still relevant, but I think that means that it has the
It does.
potential to come back into relevancy. Like, I mean, like, you know, if the story still lends itself to a modern audience, then I suppose it can be rebooted essentially, but I don't really think.
But that's the thing about shonen. The ideas that they express about friendship, about teamwork, about effort are always relevant. So even if you take a show like Hajime no Ippo that's set in the 80s, like even now it's set in the 80s, or you take a show about One Piece that's in a complete fantasy universe, or something like Bleach which is more or less in the modern day, or even shows, again, like Hunter x Hunter, or Naruto that are also in complete fantasy worlds, they have these ideas in common that will always make them relevant.
Yeah, but like when we're talking about themes of friendship and courage and teamwork, is 500 episodes really justified in explaining those themes?
Yes. Yes, it is.
I don't like. I mean, there's like. I mean, sure. But, I mean, when we're talking about one show, sure. But we have tens of shows. We have a huge amount of shows that just explore these specific themes. Like, I feel like the market has actually been oversaturated with these shows. Like, I mean, 2, 3 would be great, you know, but we got 20 of them. We like I could spend the next year and a half just watching shows that develop themes of friendship and teamwork and nothing else. Like, I mean, and by that token too, I
Yeah,
mean,
that's because these shows don't only do those things. Each individual writer that writes one of these series expresses their unique personality through their works, and that's why we keep getting so many of these works that, despite being so similar, are also so different.
well, yeah, I mean, they'll be different, and like, let's say like a mini arc will deal with specific other themes, or it will change the way it frames itself to make it something else, like, I don't know, like a political drama or something like that. So for like 5 or 10 episodes, this show is basically a political drama. But I feel like shonen's anything that's framed within the show will still be it will still be framed within a shonen. So it, like, they're basically,
That's up to the writer, not the writer.
But-
And that's up to the writer, not the genre.
but they still need to appeal to the core demographic while dealing with other themes. So they'll never be able to go into themes of loneliness or, you know, hardship as much as a show that was specifically catered to it. A shonen is essentially a Swiss Army knife. It's a jack of all trades but a master of none. It does everything okay, but everything's still framed narratively within that shonen framework. So, like, I mean, and if it deviates too much from that, you risk losing the attention of the core audience.
Some Swiss Army knives are better quality than others, though, and some have better individual tools than others, significantly better, to the point that they may even be as good, or sometimes even better, as the normal version.
But I'm not going to build a staircase with a Swiss Army knife, right? Like, I mean, it's just there are other shows that deal with every theme that a shonen deals with better because it's specifically meant for that. And when I'm talking about 500 or 700 episodes, the amount of shows that I can watch that specifically deal with each one of these individual themes better than these shows do, it grows and grows even further.
Yeah, and?
Well, I'm just saying that the initial investment that's required to watch these shows isn't worth the payoff or the narrative stakes, or like, really, I'm just saying that these shows, from a standpoint of somebody who doesn't have a lot of time, doesn't really make sense. I mean, if I had 18 hours a day, I could just sit around and watch anime. Sure, I might get bored and
Well,
start
you could also
picking them
think
up,
of it in the with this different line of reasoning, as long-running shonen can often expand on their core ideals much more than any individual shorter show could possibly do. Because this is a thing about long-running shonens. Because they, at least when done well, keep building on themselves, they are the gifts that keep on giving.
But after they build on themselves, they become inaccessible to new audiences. There are very few people now who will go into One Piece simply under the merit that it's at 700 episodes or however many episodes it's at, right? So I mean, in order for me to catch up,
I meet people constantly. That are just getting into One Piece.
yeah, I know, I meet them too, and they have weeks on end where they can just watch nothing but One Piece, and it's just, I mean, for a lot of people that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, that's one of the great things about the modern anime era, let's say. Each person can choose whatever to suit their individual needs more, so it doesn't matter how long or short a show is, as long as it has an audience to cater to.
Oh, fair enough. Well, this is yeah, we're
Really? I just completely pulled that out of my ass.
Oh, no, that was good. And we're coming up on about 40 minutes here, so we'll probably end up wrapping this up.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be a good idea to end.
Yeah,
now.
I think we've both said our piece on this issue, and yeah, for anybody watching, me and Lonecrit, we don't hate each other. Like we still talk to each other. It's fine.
How could anybody assume that you hate me? You're stiff as a board.
I know, really. Like I think I'm incapable of feeling hateful emotions. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, I think that was a pretty good conversation. Really, I just wanted.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Because this has been an issue that I've been kind of contemplating for a long time, and I never really had somebody that was, you know, as well versed in Shonen as you were to kind of discuss it with. So like being able to hold this conversation was just immensely awesome. Like if anybody ever tells me to watch a Shonen, I will forever be able to point them to this video, and it's like, that is why I do not like Shonen. And inversely, if anybody needs to tell people why they enjoy Shonen as well, for you, Lonecrit.
Well, I appreciate the compliment, but I'm actually not that well versed in Shonen. It's just that I have that passion to keep me going.
Well, I mean, and that's what you really need, right? I mean, you can be as well read as you want, but if you're not actually interested in what you're talking about, then the conversation kind of doesn't go very far. But yeah. Anyways,
well, it can, depending on how much of a good talker you are.
Yeah, really though. But anyways, so Lonecrit, if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Oh, well, my channel is called Lonely Production on YouTube, and I can also be contacted through Discord, as I hang around servers of a couple of YouTubers like Hyper here, That Anime Snob, Pause and Select, Roger Smith. I can also be contacted on Skype as Lonecrit, or on my anime list, also as Lonecrit.
Fair enough. And what kind of content do you usually make on YouTube?
Oh, I don't, because I'm lazy as hell and have only made 3 videos. I mostly enjoy assisting people like you with their videos.
Okay, fair enough. So if anybody else is a content creator and is looking for their resident Shonen expert, they should be sure to get in touch with you. Do you have a Twitter or anything?
Nope. By the way, it's worth mentioning that I'm interested in much more than just Shonen.
And yeah, well, with that, I'd like to thank everybody who's still watching. I know this was quite a long kind of podcast. I suppose the initial investment in this podcast might not be worth the payoff.
Most likely. That's why I don't listen to podcasts, because usually they're not worth it.
That's funny. I guess I kind of defeated myself on that point, but
and that's kind of me being hypocritical, considering this entire argument was me arguing why you should totally watch long things.
Well, I suppose that just means that everybody's wrong about everything and that we should all shut up and never talk about it again. All right. On behalf of myself and Lonecrit, I'd like to thank you for watching, and until next time, this was The Smuggler, signing off.